Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video and commenting where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into these chilling stories. It was Christmas Eve and I was home alone. My parents had gone to visit my aunt and uncle's place for a family dinner, but I decided to stay back. I'm not much of a social person, and I'd just come back from college a few days earlier, so I wanted some time to relax. I had the house all to myself, which felt nice at first. It was a small, single-story house in Florida. Nothing fancy, but cozy enough for me and my family. I was sitting on the couch in the living room, binge-watching some Christmas movies. I'd already watched Home Alone, and had just started The Grinch. I remember feeling pretty good. Snuggled up with a blanket, a bowl of popcorn in my lap, and the warm glow of the Christmas tree lights flickering in the corner of the room. The house felt quiet and peaceful, just the way I liked it. Around 10 p.m. it started raining. Not heavy, just a light drizzle tapping on the windows. It added to the cozy vibe, and I thought about how lucky I was to be inside, warm and dry. But then, not even 10 minutes later, I heard it. A faint sound, like something scraping across the roof. At first I ignored it. I figured it was probably just the wind, or maybe some branches brushing against the house. It's Florida, and we've got a lot of trees in our neighborhood. Nothing unusual, right? But the sound didn't stop. In fact, it got louder. It wasn't constant, but every couple of minutes, I'd hear what sounded like footsteps. Not heavy stomping, but lighter, almost cautious, like someone trying not to be noticed. I paused the movie and sat there for a moment, listening. The rain wasn't loud enough to drown it out. I started to get this weird feeling in my stomach, like something wasn't right. Still, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal got up there somehow? A raccoon or a stray cat? Maybe. I'd heard of things like that happening before. But as I sat there, the noise moved. It started from one end of the roof and slowly made its way to the other side, right above the living room. My heart started racing a little. It didn't sound like an animal. It was too deliberate, too human. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom. I tried to keep it casual, like I wasn't freaked out or anything. "Hey, when you guys coming back?" She didn't respond right away. I figured she was busy at dinner or something, but I kept my phone in my hand, just in case. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? "Hi, I think there's someone on my roof," but I'm not sure. They'd probably think I was crazy. The noise stopped for a while, and I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. I tried to go back to watching my movie, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept darting to the windows, scanning for any shadows or movement outside. The rain had picked up a little, and the sound of it hitting the windows was making me more on edge. About 20 minutes later, I heard something else. This time, it was a faint thud, like someone jumping down onto the ground. My stomach dropped. I muted the TV and sat completely still, straining to hear. There it was again. Another noise, this time from the backyard. I slowly got up from the couch and crept over to the back door. It's one of those sliding glass doors with a curtain that I usually keep closed. I pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The backyard was dark, except for the faint glow of the neighbors' Christmas lights shining through the fence. I couldn't see anyone, but I swore I felt like I was being watched. I decided to turn off the Christmas tree lights to make the house less noticeable. I didn't want whoever or whatever was out there to know I was awake. I kept the living room light on for now because sitting in total darkness would have freaked me out even more. A few minutes later, I heard a noise near the side of the house. It sounded like metal clinking, like someone fiddling with the gate. My pulse was pounding in my ears by now. I locked the front door earlier, but I double-checked it just to be sure. Then I went to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. I'm not proud of how scared I was, but I didn't know what else to do. The sound moved again, this time to the other side of the house. It was like whoever it was circling, looking for a way in. I texted my mom again, this time a little more panicked. "Mom, I think someone's outside. Please call me." Still no response. I debated calling 911, but I didn't want to overreact. What if it really was just an animal? Or maybe a neighbor checking something out? I didn't want to embarrass myself, but then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a window sliding open. I froze. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the knife. The sound came from the guest bedroom, which we barely used. I hadn't even thought to check if the windows were locked. I felt so stupid. I tiptoed down the hallway, trying to keep my breathing quiet. When I reached the guest room, I could see the window was cracked open about an inch. The blinds were swaying slightly, and a cold breeze was coming in. I stood there, paralyzed, not knowing what to do. And then I saw it. A hand. A man's hand. Gripping the windowsill, pulling it open further. I don't know what came over me, but I yelled out, "Who's there?" My voice cracked, but it was loud enough to startle him. The hand froze for a second, then disappeared. I ran back to the living room, clutching the knife so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what to do next. I grabbed my phone and finally dialed 911. As soon as the operator answered, I blurted out, "Someone's trying to break into my house. I'm home alone." She asked for my address and told me to stay on the line while she dispatched the police. I locked myself in the bathroom, still clutching the knife, and tried to keep my breathing quiet. A few minutes felt like hours. I could hear movement outside the bathroom door, like soft footsteps. My stomach twisted in knots, and I felt like I might throw up. Then I heard a loud knock on the front door, followed by a man's voice yelling, "Police, open up!" I stayed frozen for a moment, unsure if it was really them or a trick. Then my phone buzzed, and the 911 operator told me the officers had arrived. I slowly unlocked the bathroom door and crept to the front door, peeking through the peephole. 2 uniformed officers stood there, and I quickly let them in. They searched the house and the yard but didn't find anyone. The guest bedroom window was wide open, and there were muddy footprints on the windowsill and floor. One of the officers told me it looked like the intruder ran off when he heard the sirens. They stayed with me until my parents got home, which wasn't much longer after that. I didn't sleep at all that night. The thought of someone being in my house, so close to me, still gives me chills. The police never caught the guy, and I've been extra paranoid ever since. I triple check all the locks and windows now, especially at night. So yeah, that's my story. It might not sound like much, but it's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. Be careful out there, and always lock your windows, even the ones you don't think anyone will use. It was 2 weeks before Christmas, and I was alone at home, decorating the tree. I live in a small house, in a quiet neighborhood in Florida. It's one of those places where people know each other, but we're not exactly best friends. Most of my neighbors are retired or keep to themselves. I've never really had a reason to feel unsafe here. That night, I had Christmas music playing softly in the background, and the scent of cinnamon candles filled the living room. It was peaceful, the kind of evening that makes you feel like everything is right in the world. I had just finished stringing up the lights when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from my neighbor, Mrs. McAllister. She's an older woman who lives directly across the street. She wrote, "Hi dear, I think I just saw someone walking around your house. Are you expecting anyone?" My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't invited anyone over, and I wasn't ordering any deliveries. For a moment, I thought she might have been mistaken. Maybe she saw the shadow of a tree moving in the wind or something. But then I realized there wasn't much wind that night. I texted her back quickly. "No, I'm not expecting anyone. Where did you see them?" She replied almost immediately. "They were in your backyard. It looked like a man. I'm not sure what he was doing." My stomach twisted. My backyard is fenced, so whoever it was must have climbed over. I walked to the back window and peeked through the blinds. It was dark, but I could make out the outline of the patio and part of the yard. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I texted her again. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll check it out." Her response came quickly. "Be careful, dear. Do you need me to call someone?" I told her no, not yet. I didn't want to overreact. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and cautiously stepped out onto the back porch. The cool December air hit me, and everything was eerily quiet. I scanned the yard with the flashlight beam, moving it slowly across the grass and bushes. Nothing. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a bit silly, but also hoping that if someone was there, they'd reveal themselves and leave. No response. I stood there for a minute, listening for any sounds. The only thing I could hear was the faint rustling of leaves. After a while, I convinced myself that Mrs. McAllister must have been mistaken. Maybe she saw a stray cat or something and thought it was a person. I went back inside, locked the door, and double-checked all the windows, just to be safe. An hour later, I was finishing up the ornaments on the tree when my phone buzzed again. Another text from Mrs. McAllister. "He's back. I just saw him near your side door." My chest tightened. I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps, no knocks, nothing. I turned off the Christmas music and stood completely still, straining to hear any sound. The house felt different now. What had been cozy and warm earlier suddenly felt exposed and vulnerable. I texted her back, "Are you sure? What did he look like?" She replied, "Tall, wearing dark clothes. I think he was trying to look into your windows." My hands were shaking. I wanted to call the police, but a part of me still wondered if this was some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe it was a neighbor's kid messing around, or someone looking for a lost pet. But why would they come back? I decided to check the side of the house. I grabbed the flashlight again, my heart pounding in my chest, and went to the side window. I peeked through the blinds, but it was hard to see much. The beam of the flashlight caught something unusual, though. The side gate, which is usually latched, was slightly open. I couldn't remember if I'd closed it earlier. Had I left it like that? Or had someone opened it? I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, feeling exposed. Every window suddenly felt like a vulnerability. I moved to the kitchen and turned off the lights so I could see outside better. I scanned the yard again, but it was as empty as before. Just as I was starting to calm down, I heard it. The faint sound of something metallic, like a handle being jiggled. My blood ran cold. It was coming from the back door. I tiptoed to the hallway, my heart thundering in my chest. The jiggling stopped. I held my breath, waiting for it to start again. But everything was silent. After a few minutes, I worked up the courage to peek through the back window. I couldn't see anyone. Whoever it was, they were gone, and called the police immediately. They arrived about 20 minutes later and checked the property, but they didn't find anyone. The officer suggested it might have been a prowler or someone trying to see if the house was empty. He told me to stay alert and call again if anything else happened. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I checked the yard in daylight. The only thing I found was a single muddy footprint near the back door. I don't know who it was or what they wanted, but I haven't felt safe in my house since. I've installed cameras and motion lights, and I've been double checking every lock before I go to bed. I've always loved Christmas. The smell of pine, the twinkling lights, the cheesy holiday movies. It's my favorite time of year. This year, I decided to go all out with decorations, even though I was spending Christmas alone. My family had gone to visit relatives up north, but I had to stay back for work. So, I figured I'd make my house as festive as possible to keep from feeling lonely. That's how my Christmas Eve started. I was in the living room setting up my tree. I had the fireplace channel playing on the TV, a mug of hot chocolate on the coffee table, and a stack of ornaments ready to go. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I heard my phone ping. I'd set up notifications for my doorbell camera, so I figured it was just a delivery. I walked over to my phone and opened the app. The screen showed a man on my porch. He wasn't doing anything at first, just standing there with his back to the door, looking out into the street. He was tall, wearing a black hoodie and jeans. Something about the way he was pacing back and forth made me uneasy. I watched for a minute, hoping he'd leave, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer to the door, almost like he was trying to look inside. "Can I help you?" I said through the doorbell speaker. My voice came out shakier than I wanted. The man froze. Then he turned slowly to face the camera. His face was shadowed by the hood, but I could see his mouth curl into a weird smile. He didn't say anything, just stood there staring at the camera. My heart started racing. "If you're looking for someone, you've got the wrong house," I added, trying to sound more confident. He tilted his head like he was trying to figure me out. Then, without a word, he stepped back off the porch and disappeared from view. I waited, watching the screen, but he didn't come back. I felt a little relieved, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I double-checked the locks on the front door and then went around to check the back door and windows. Everything was secure, so I tried to brush it off as some weirdo passing through the neighborhood. Maybe he was drunk or confused. Either way, I told myself it was nothing to worry about, but I couldn't really relax. I kept glancing at my phone every few minutes, checking the live feed from the camera. The street outside was empty, and the house was quiet. Still, I felt this heavy sense of unease. It was like the air in the room had changed. An hour later, I was hanging the last ornament on the tree when my phone buzzed again. I almost dropped the ornament as I scrambled to grab my phone. Sure enough, the doorbell camera had picked up motion. This time he wasn't pacing. He was standing perfectly still in the middle of the porch, staring directly into the camera. His hood was still up, but now I could see his face more clearly. His eyes looked empty, like there was no emotion behind them, just blank, cold. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking again. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and knocked on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then, he waited. My chest felt tight and I could barely breathe. I thought about calling the police, but part of me felt silly. He hadn't actually done anything illegal, but what if he tried to break in? "I'm calling the cops," I said, hoping it would scare him off. That's when he did something that made my blood run cold. He leaned in closer to the camera and whispered, "You should." Then he turned and walked away again. I stood there, staring at the screen, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were trembling as I dialed 911. I explained everything to the dispatcher, and they said they'd send an officer to patrol the area. I felt a little better knowing someone was on the way, but I still couldn't shake the fear creeping up my spine. The officer arrived about 20 minutes later. By then, the man was long gone. I showed the officer the footage from the doorbell camera, and he took a report. He told me to keep my doors locked and call again if the man came back. Before he left, he assured me that it was probably just someone messing around and that they'd keep an eye on the neighborhood. After he left, I tried to go back to decorating, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see the man standing there again. I decided to turn off the lights and head upstairs to my bedroom. Maybe if it looked like no one was home, he'd stay away. Around midnight, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. A loud bang, followed by another. My stomach dropped. Someone was trying to kick in the front door. I jumped out of bed and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 again as I crept to the top of the stairs. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the phone. The dispatcher answered, and I whispered what was happening. "Stay on the line with me," she said. "Officers are on their way." The banging continued, each kick making the door rattle in its frame. I could hear the man yelling something, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the banging stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound. The silence was almost worse. I stayed crouched at the top of the stairs, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The dispatcher kept talking, trying to keep me calm, but I barely heard her. A few minutes later, I saw a flashing light through the window. The police had arrived. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. The man was gone. The officers stayed with me while I reviewed the doorbell footage again. This time, the man's face was fully visible as he kicked the door. One of the officers recognized him as someone they'd dealt with before, a local troublemaker with a history of breaking and entering. They promised to keep patrolling the area and advised me to stay somewhere else for the night. I packed a bag and went to a friend's house. Even now, days later, I can't shake the feeling of unease. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.